Welcome today to our webinar on disaster preparedness for home and livestock. I am so grateful for our colleagues, Extension Agent Sarah Bostick, our Agriculture Extension Agent in Sarasota County, and Dr. Maria Rometto, our Family and Consumer Sciences Agent. They will be sharing today how to prepare our livestock and home for a disaster, and specifically focusing on hurricanes. So welcome.
And I'll send you guys a chat just to start with, so you all know where it is. Just type them here, and as we go, if there's questions that pop up, Sarah, do you want to just, Sarah or Kelly, you want to just flag me, and we can ask questions as we go. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and share my computer screen with you guys so that we're all looking at the same thing. And see, sometimes it works fast, sometimes it kicks in slow. Okay, can y'all see that?
Yes, everything's coming in.
Great. Okay, there we go. So hurricane, so when we initially started talking about doing this class, we were talking about doing hurricane prep for home and livestock, and recent events have made us really think a little bit differently in more about in terms of general disaster preparedness. But since we are sidling up pretty fast to hurricane season, I'm going to make about 95% of what I talk about specific to hurricanes. So here we go. So the first big question, of course, is, do you stay or evacuate your animals? And that's a really big question, right? And so, and that really helps you figure out, where do you go from there? That's really the first big question. So a good rule of thumb is that if your pasture, for your pastured animals, if your pasture area meets the following 5 criteria, your larger animals are generally safer staying put than going through the process of being transported elsewhere. So those 5 criteria are that you have a pasture that does not have non-native trees in it. And the reason non-native trees is important is because the trees in Florida are really, they've spent, thousands of years developing in a place that has hurricanes. And so they have had to really adapt to those really strong winds and floods. Non-native trees often come from places that don't have the kind of flooding and hurricane force winds that we get here. And so they're much more likely to turn over in a hurricane. So non-native trees is a really important thing for your pasture. No overhead power lines or poles. That's a big one, because if those come down in a storm, bad things happen. No debris or just sources of debris that could blow in from somewhere else, maybe somewhere else on your property or maybe a neighbor's property. Barbed wire is actually not a great thing to have in a pasture during hurricanes. A woven wire fence tends to be a much safer option for animals. And then it's a good idea to have a pasture that's at least an acre. Larger is even better, but smaller than that, and your livestock might not be able to actually avoid debris as it's blowing around. So if you can check all 5 of those boxes off, then staying put's probably your better bet. And if your pasture doesn't meet those criteria, evacuation with your animals is something that you might want to consider. So we obviously live in a very coastal area. Some parts of our county flood much more than other areas. About a quarter of our area is in like a special flood hazard zone, which has results that look kind of like this picture. This is actually a picture from a hurricane in Florida a few years ago. And one of the reasons I put this picture in here is because I thought this was such a great creative way to provide these horses with food in a totally flooded pasture. So getting really creative and thinking outside of the box was really important in this scenario. Okay, so if you do indeed decide to evacuate, like if your pasture is just not quite the right pasture, sorry, something funky just popped up on my screen. Let me minimize. Whoop, I'm having all sorts of technical issues right now. There we go. Now I can see my own screen. Okay, so if you do decide to evacuate your animals, the best time frame to do that is a solid 48 hours before hurricane force winds actually start in your area. So that, that takes some pre-planning, and sometimes storms come a little quicker than that, or we can't actually put an evacuation plan for large animals into play that quickly. And then the second the second thing to keep in mind is that it's really not safe to transport large animals when wind gusts are above 40 miles an hour, just because those trailers are not very stable when they get hit by wind. So making sure those two things are in place. Okay, so if you do decide to evacuate, before you travel, there are three extremely important things to have in hand. One, unless you're traveling like with your chickens or something like that, then you need all of your animals' vaccines to be up to date. And for horses, there's actually quite a few vaccines that they really need to be safely traveling around. That's Eastern and Western encephalitis, West Nile, tetanus, and rabies. And a good rule of thumb is that if your horse hasn't been vaccinated in the previous 4 to 6 months, it's a pretty good idea to go ahead and give them a booster. So about half of those illnesses are spread by mosquitoes, and right after hurricanes, as you all well know, we have such a huge uptick in mosquito populations, and so it's a good idea to just revaccinate to make sure your animals will be safe. And then when you travel, make sure you have a health certificate for each animal. And then for horses and other equine animals, in order to cross state lines, you have to have a negative Coggins test for equine infectious anemia in hand for each horse. Every single one needs one of those negative test result certificates in order to cross the state line. If you want some of the guidelines, we'll send you out this link. But up here at the top, this is the website that has the list of exactly what things you need to have in hand before you cross a state line with animals. Okay, so that's evacuation. So if you don't decide to evacuate, this is the list of things to prepare if you're actually going to stay put with your animals. And we're going to go through these just one at a time. So identification is really important. So sometimes fences come down during hurricanes and animals take themselves away, trying to find a safer place to be. So it's really important that you have a few different ways that your animals can be identified. In our area, most of the animals that end up loose on roads are taken to the Arcadia stockyard, but you have to be able to prove that those animals are yours in order to reclaim them. So taking pictures of each animal is super important, and make sure that you really focus in on anything that makes them really unique. So, for example, if you have a brown horse with a black mane, take pictures of the things that you know would help you pick your brown horse with a black mane out of a crowd of 100 brown horses with a black mane. So like little scars, little funny little swirls of hair. Make sure you get really good pictures of those sorts of things. And then for animals with halters, a great way to keep them identified is you can actually just write your name and your phone number on a piece of paper, put that paper inside a really tightly sealed Ziploc bag, and then securely duct tape that bag to your animal's halter. And that generally will make it through a storm. And folks that help at places like Arcadia Stockyard, they know to look for things like that taped to animals. And then for horses and other animals that have lovely long tails, a waterproof luggage tag can actually be really handy. You can write your name and number on that waterproof luggage tag and actually just braid it right into your horse's tail. So I know the picture of this barn looks a little bit dramatic, but I actually used to own a barn that looked a lot like this. It was always one storm away from just collapsing, and this is not an uncommon sight to see barns like this. And so clearly, with a barn like this, animals are not safer inside of the barn. But even with well-constructed barns, for large animals like horses, those animals are usually still safer outside than inside of a barn. Because if that barn ends up with some structural issues, or timbers inside collapse, things like that, your horse or your other livestock are really trapped. So outside can be a safer place for large animals. Small animals like chickens, they are safer inside. So if you do have small animals like chickens, just remember that when that flood water comes, it floods really quick. And so even if they are inside of a barn or some sort of building, make sure they have a high place to perch, so that they can be well up above that brief flood water that we tend to get in this area. Okay, so if you know that it's safer to keep some of your larger animals outside on pasture, make sure, we already talked about this, but like really make sure that there's no power lines over the pasture, no power lines could fall into the pasture, and that there's no non-native trees and no barbed wire fencing. Okay, so I made this little chart because water can be tricky to figure out, right? So it's one of those things where we think a lot about making sure that we have enough water, but it's kind of a funny thing to think about in terms of having enough water for animals that are outside during a flood. But as you well know, floods here don't last very long. We have such porous soil that water runs right out. And when we lose electricity, that can be an issue with getting more water for your animals. So I made this little handy dandy chart, and this just basically tells you for a bunch of different kinds of animals. You can see here on the left how much water do they need each day, and I'll share this chart with y'all via email as well. But I did the calculation of if you need water for a whole week for one of these animals, how much water do you need for a whole week? So for example, if sheep actually don't need a whole heck of a lot of water. They only drink about 2 gallons a day. So 2 gallons per sheep turns into about 14 gallons a week. That's not a crazy amount of water. But with things like an adult horse, they require as much as 20 gallons of water a day, especially when it's hot. And that adds up to about 140 gallons. It's a good bit of water. So when you're trying to figure out how much water to have on hand, a minimum of 3 days water for all of your animals is a good idea. If you can figure out having a whole week's worth of water stored and ready for your animals in the case of a hurricane, that's a really good idea. And so I just did a little word problem here that was really geared towards 4-H folks, or 4-H youth rather, but I think it is equally helpful for adults. All this math took me a while. So, for example, if you have 10 chickens, 1 donkey, 2 adult horses, 5 goats, 7 pigs, you need about 525 gallons of water for those 25-ish animals for a week. That's a lot of water. So what does 525 gallons look like? Here are various versions of what that looks like. So clearly you're not going to be stashing, small made for people water bottles. You would need 4,200 of those. Even those big 5-gallon jugs, you need 105 of those, right? That's probably not realistic. Trash cans, if you have a whole lot of trash cans lying around, maybe, but something like an IBC tank is probably a better bet. One of those tanks, they tend to be about 275 gallons. If you have, a small tractor with forks, you can pick it up. You can pick it up with tractor forks. You can haul it in the back of a pickup truck. So that's probably a good size container to aim for if you have livestock, if you have about that number of livestock. And then if you want to sink quite a bit more money into it, but also have the capacity to store a whole lot more water, this style of very, very large tank, varies in size from about 250 to 2,000 gallons, or actually even more than 2,000 gallons. But those are definitely an investment. So so even for animals, you know, like if we have an issue where, you know, the water we have stored becomes contaminated, or if you simply didn't have enough stored and you need to pull water out of a different source, it's not a bad idea to purify that water. If your animal is not used to drinking water from your neighbor's pond, for example, there may be something in that water that your animal's digestive system is just not quite ready to handle. And so purifying that water is a good idea. It may help to avoid some diarrhea. So this is a really good, really quick little recipe. 1 gallon of water to 8 drops of unscented bleach, and unscented is really important. Scented bleach is not considered okay for consumption. It has some added chemicals in it, and it also is not as strong as unscented bleach, so it doesn't do as good of a job as of actually purifying water. There's just some cute pictures. So feed storage. So again, a minimum of 3 days of feed, but 7 days is better. And then so then, like, where do you store all of this feed? You know, if you have quite a few animals, this can be a lot of feed. Hay should be up on pallets and covered with waterproof tarps. You know, preferably inside somewhere, and you might just not have inside as an option. So if you don't, just making sure that it gets really well covered and tied down. If you need a good source or a cheap source of really high quality tarps, one of my favorite tips is that billboards are no longer made with paper. They're made with really heavy duty vinyl tarps. And after a billboard ad runs, they get taken down, and those billboard companies have to do something with them. And so billboard companies now sell their used tarps, and you can generally get them for quite cheap, and they're very high quality and big. So they're really good for covering hay. And then grain and supplements, put those in watertight containers, because water can get in anywhere and everywhere. And then if you know that you live in a flood zone where you know, your floodwaters come up so fast that you may end up transporting your hay and feed around in a boat, make sure that your feed is stored very high up off the ground. It's incredible how quickly hay goes bad once it's wet. And then, of course, secure all the movable items. And it's a really good idea to secure pretty much anything that's smaller than a tractor. And you know, things like tractors generally are safer to park out in the middle of a big field where a tree's not going to land on them, and if anything happens to the barn's not going to fall on it. And make sure that everything inside and outside of the barn gets secured. It's easy to forget that when winds get blowing hard enough, they can push right into a barn and start blowing things around inside of a barn. And this is a picture, actually. Are there, Sarah Davis, are there any 4-H youth on this call or on this webinar?
I don't, not sure, but there's no questions right now, but yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
Sounds good. I put this picture in here because this is a yard or a pasture that's pretty well cleaned up for a hurricane, but there's still a few things that just need some extra securing. So with youth on the webinar, I was going to ask folks to actually pick out the things that they see that might need some extra securing.
It'd still be fun to do that. You want
Sounds
to
great.
in the chat window, or?
Yeah, let's do it. And I won't be able to see the chat, so if you wanna tell me what folks see in here.
What needs securing?
Yeah, what needs securing in this picture? Like, it's pretty good.
The ladder?
Exactly. Yeah, that ladder.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
Yeah. Yep. Anything else you see? I know that you can't quite tell what some of these things are in the picture, but take your best guess as to what some of these things are. That ladder is, to me, the #1 thing that needs to be secured because it can go flying.
that a blue water barrel, like a 50-gallon barrel?
Yeah, yep, exactly. So if that barrel is full, that's a totally reasonable place for it. If it's not full, that also can go flying. I would also make sure that this fence gets secured, because with the amount of slamming that can happen in the wind, it could actually come off and also take flight. Yeah, those are the big things that I see. It looks like back here in this corner, there's some other little odds and ends stuff, but those are the big ones that I see. Awesome. Thank you, guys. So turn off the electricity to the barn if you have electricity on in the barn. There's a huge amount of electricity flowing through all of those big power lines, and just flipping those switches in the barn or wherever your breaker box is can save you an enormous amount of trials and tribulations in the long run. And then this is, there's kind of two different lists of things that's really, really good to have on hand when you have any sort of livestock and you know a hurricane's coming. One are things that fall into the tool category. So things to repair fences if you have livestock that requires fencing. You know, your chickens maybe not so much, but you know, horses certainly. So like hammer, nails, wire cutters, pry bar. I have an asterisk next to the chainsaw because chainsaws are one of those things. They are a truly phenomenal tool. I have one. I love it. I use it whenever I get the chance. But it's also incredibly dangerous. And so if you are really new to chainsaws, this is probably something you don't want in your fence repair toolkit. Learn how to use a chainsaw with someone who knows how to use one really well in a non-emergency situation. There's more, I think I remember reading once, don't quote me on this one, that there's more chainsaw related injuries after major storms than at any other point in the year in this region. And then the odds and ends stuff, fire extinguisher that is up to date. So like not one that's 20 years old, like I recently found in my closet. Some duct tape and some extra fuel is super handy. And if you have a generator, that's awesome. And make sure that any old fuel has been drained out of it and that you have new fuel to put in that generator. A lot of folks struggle with generators not working right after hurricanes, and it's simply because there's old fuel in that generator. And then this is the first aid kit to have on hands for animals. So, you know, a lot of this is the same kind of stuff that you would have in your own personal first aid kit, just a lot bigger. You know, so like scissors, a knife, bandages, leg wraps, towels, quilts, flashlight with extra batteries, maybe extra halters and ropes if that's the kind of animal you have, and then ointments and medicines. And don't forget things like some sort of like biting insect fly type spray, just because the insect populations really boom after hurricanes and can cause a lot of problems for animals. Okay, so that's all the preparation for a storm. So after a storm, there's really a series of 5 things. That's a good series of 5 things to do immediately after a storm. And the first is inspecting the eyes, feet, and bodies of your animals for injuries, right? Like make sure they're okay. And then this is one that a lot of folks, especially folks that are not originally from Florida, don't know about. And it's really, really important to scout your pasture for red maple tree branches and leaves. If you know you have any red maple anywhere nearby. Red maple is actually highly toxic to livestock, especially to horses. They don't usually eat it in large enough quantities to get sick, but after a big storm, all of those leaves end up on the ground. And so they're much more likely to have to eat enough of it to have a major toxicity effect. So look for red maple leaves if you know you have red maple near your pastures. Search for down power lines, just make sure there's not anywhere near. And then for insurance, go ahead, just like you would do for your house, take pictures of damage. Make sure you document. And then if an animal is missing, as soon as you realize you have an animal missing, go ahead and call animal control so that the wheels start turning with finding your animal and making sure it gets back to you. Okay, so that's what I have on hurricane specifically, but I also just wanted to layer in a little bit about our current crisis. So, you know, our current pandemic is affecting people very much like a hurricane does right now. And there are resources available to folks who are struggling to afford feed for their animals. So just like after a hurricane, you know, if you're struggling to get the resources that you need to keep your animals healthy and safe, many of those resources are also available right now to folks that are suffering, you know, an economic inability to feed their animals instead of can't get down the road because there's a tree in the road inability to feed their animals. So if you know that you need some help, the first place to start with cats and dogs. So if you have cats and dogs and you're struggling to feed them, the first place to start with is actually your local food pantries. They're doing a really good job right now of keeping things like cat food and dog food in stock. They're not keeping, you know, cattle feed in stock at your local food pantry, but there's potentially help with entities like the Florida Department of Agriculture. They've got some special funding set aside. So if you need more information about that, let me know, or Sarah or Kelly or anyone else is on the call, and we can help get you connected with the right resources. And that's what I've got. I'm gonna stop sharing that screen. And any questions, thoughts, comments, ideas?
So I put Sarah's contact information in the chat window, and here's a link to her latest agricultural blog, which has many of those resources available, and the links to a lot of the resources the state is providing and the federal government as well.
Thank you, Sarah. That's perfect. Yeah. Anything? I would also just love to hear people's thoughts and ideas. And yeah, Karen.
I'm going to jump in. It's Karen Geist, the volunteer coordinator at the extension. I was around horses for many years and had my horse go through some, you know, difficult situations and unfortunately, it was roughly at the same time Andrew came through South Florida, and, you know, a lot of us up here sent a lot of stuff down there, but just extra lead lines, lead ropes, can't say that enough, extra first aid equipment and all kind of supplies like that. And just with COVID going on right now, to kind of think ahead on getting some of these things, like you might want to have extra gloves on hand for yourself if one of your animals gets hurt. And those are kind of, some of these things are hard to find right now. So just think ahead on that. And as Sarah was talking about some identification on your animal, she gave you a lot of good ideas, but some of your horses and your cattle have tattooed brands too. So that's another thing that you either, it's on some of your papers with your livestock or horses, or take photos. So that's just another way, but just kind of think ahead. We have that added thing with COVID going on, and kind of a increased, you know, need for supplies, and being careful going and getting the supplies. If there might be, oh, there's a hurricane coming, there might be a lot of people trying to get it ahead of time, and the supplies might be a little thin. So hope that helped.
Yes, thank you, Karen. That was super helpful. Yeah, and I will, while Maria's talking, I'm going to try to find a resource that I sent out recently also of some of the big companies right now that still have some personal protective equipment available. They're not necessarily the places you would get your things like your gloves on a typical day, but this is obviously not a typical moment in time. So I'll share that resource as well.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move into Dr. Rometo's presentation, so I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen, and
Great.
We will get started. Okay, so disaster preparedness. Are you prepared for a disaster? So some of the things that I wanted to cover in our last half of the class is some basic terminology and wind scale, preparing for a disaster and specifically hurricanes, getting informed, creating a plan, and assembling your kit. We're going to talk a little bit about shelters and evacuation, and then post-disaster precautions and natural hazards. So hurricane season is right around the corner, right? June 1st, and it actually extends all the way through November 30th. And many times people get more complacent once October 1st hits, but sometimes that's when our more serious storms do hit. This year, our ocean waters and our Gulf waters are 3 degrees hotter. So they are predicting a more robust hurricane season. So what is the difference between a watch and a warning? Well, typically the hurricane watch, you have 48 hours in advance before you start to feel some tropical storm force winds. And with a hurricane warning, you have about 36 hours. And if there is a silver lining to having an environment where we sustain hurricanes versus earthquakes, at least we do have warnings. We see it being developed in the ocean, and then we watch as that cone slowly approaches, whether or not we're in it. And you've noticed from previous years, even though it looks like we are in the cone, all of a sudden we are out of the cone, or vice versa. So there is a wind scale, and you hear Category 1 or Cat 1, Cat 2. So we've had some pretty strong tropical storms that have had wind gusts up to 74, 75 mile an hour winds. And that will produce some damage, some downed trees, especially if there had been a lot of rains, a lot of debris around, but nothing that can't be managed quickly. It's when we get into a Category 2 and a Category 3 where we start to see that more extensive damage. And then, of course, whether you're in a Category 4 or Category 5, it's pretty much catastrophic with flooding that will also occur. So, you think with the COVID-19, like really now we're going to get started with hurricane season. There's so much to do. Where do I start? So we want to make sure that the more preparation you do, the safer you and your family will be. So gathering information, just what you're doing tonight, learning together all kinds of information. And there's some wonderful resources. Our Sarasota County has wonderful resources on its website of things to do. They will be sending out our hurricane guides in the next few weeks. That is a great piece of information. You'll see those in grocery stores. You'll see them in libraries if our libraries do open up, but you'll see them all over town. Make a plan and make sure you communicate that plan with family members inside the home, but also your family up north. Assemble your kit and supplies, and you maintain everything so everything stays nice and fresh. So let's start by gathering information. So we want to learn about what our community has, what Sarasota County has done for us, or Manatee County has done for us. And as soon as hurricane season's over, our emergency services begins planning for the next season. And they start figuring out what worked, what didn't, what improvements could be made, what things could be streamlined. So learning your evacuation plan, going online and finding out your flood zone. Your insurance company already knows your flood zone and has based part of your premium off of that flood zone. sign up for Sarasota's Code Red. So if you receive Amber alerts, you are on the Code Red system. But the Code Red system will also let you know that there's a water main break, or water has been turned off. And in that case, you would go into a boil water alert. But you also need to think about buying a weather operated radio. And a good time to buy that is coming up as we approach our tax-free hurricane supply list. And that will be the first few days in June, and that will be advertised on our local news channels. Learn your risks in your area, know your zone, your evacuation zone, and your FEMA flood zone. The next thing you want to do is create a contact list. And you want to make sure that all the phone numbers that you have in there are correct and up to date. If you are thinking about traveling up north during the season or evacuate up north, then certainly you want to take with you phone numbers to family, friends, neighbors who would have a visual eye contact on your home and property to find out how your home how it's sustained through the storm. If you are having a meeting place within your home, remember that hurricanes also spawn tornadoes. So having that interior room in your home that has no windows, a closet is a good thing, but also think about, if possible, taking in a mattress with you to help with any damage. Plan for those with special needs. If there's somebody in your home who is on oxygen 24/7 or is not able to walk, it might be a good idea to fill out the Sarasota County Medical Needs application. You can do that online, or you can download it and mail it in. And what that will do, it alerts the county that there's an individual that might need assistance. In preparation for the storm, they will open up a shelter that will have generators, and those persons will be picked up by the county and taken to those shelters. The caveat to that is that it's done early, you're taken early. And people many times don't want to be in a shelter for that extra day or two. So they opt to stay home, which is completely fine as well. But you also want to plan for pets. And if you are going to a shelter, you will need to take or have your pet in some type of a pet carrier. You'll need all your pet supplies with you as well. Know your closest shelter. And also remember that the closest shelter might not be the shelter you will be admitted to. There's a lot of work and effort going in right now to updating our shelters, finding new shelters that will sustain hurricane force winds, that will also meet the criteria of maintaining that social distancing. And determine if and when you are going to evacuate. So, of course, the longer you wait, the more traffic you're going to face. I've had people ask, well, can I leave like at 2 or 3 in the morning? Absolutely. And so is everybody else in Sarasota County. Remember, we are in a main thoroughfare. So people exiting Miami will come across Hurricane Alley and head up right north through 75 through Sarasota. So we're not only dealing with Sarasota or Collier County traffic, we're also dealing perhaps with traffic from Fort Lauderdale and Miami and the Keys. So evacuating early is much better than waiting, but certainly that is a personal decision. So assembling your kit and supplies, check your insurance coverage to make sure that you are not overinsured or underinsured. Take a look at that wind deductible. Be aware of how substantial that initial payment will be. If you are making any changes to your insurance, such as including, now you're thinking about including flood insurance, that's a great thing to do, and it's relatively inexpensive. But many insurance companies put a pause on when that policy takes effect. Sometimes that pause is up to 30 days, which would put you out of being able to purchase flood insurance at this time. You are not allowed as a Florida resident to purchase flood insurance from, guess what, June 1st, and then you can purchase it starting December 1st. They figured us all out. But make sure you inventory all your possessions in your home. So whether you take a camera, whether you take your phone, but go around to each room of your home, open up closets, open up drawers. If you have special artifacts, paintings, jewelry, put your jewelry in safety deposit box early, don't wait. And take note of those items. Make sure if they are expensive artifacts and paintings that perhaps you get a floater on your insurance policy to take care of those items. But don't forget to take video of your garage and what you have stored in there, your car, but also you might have some very expensive tools, and also your lanai and your whole lanai area. Gather all of your important documents and take photos of those as well. Keep them in a secured place. Make sure your driver's license is with you at all times, because if you do leave your home to go to a shelter, you will need to show your license in order to come back into your neighborhood many times. For documents, things like your home deeds, passports, your tax returns from the last 5 years, insurance policies, all those types of veterans papers, all those types of documents. Make sure they are locked up and in an airtight container, and that you know where they are. Remember, cash is golden, ATM machines, and if we do lose electricity, we'll be down. So make sure you get out plenty of cash prior to the storm. Make sure your car's in good working order, that your flat tire, that your spare tire is not flat, and that you have a full tank of gas. Gather a list of licensed, insured contractors, because when we see the cone of opportunity, so do others, our friends up north, and they will find an opportunity to go out and find the magnetic sign that's quadruple A handyman, and once the storm is over, make their way down into our county. And if we have lost electricity and your home has sustained damage, you are stressed, you are hot, you're tired, and here's our friend rolling up to help us. So now is the time not only to gain those list of insured contractors and licensed contractors, but ask your friends, who do they use for a roofer? Who do they use for as an electrician, a plumber, a general contractor, a handyman? And another thing to ask is, what is their hourly rate today, not post-storm? Because many times, even though they are not allowed to, they do raise their hourly rate. So get all that information gathered ahead of time. Assemble your kit and supplies. Of course, extra flashlights. I love the lantern style flashlights. They illuminate a larger area. And batteries, you might think about a flashlight for every bedroom in the home that somebody's sleeping in, and every room in the home. You should have at least a 3 to 7 day food supply. Think of things that are high energy, low salt, and non-perishable. A 7-day water supply, about 1 person per gallon per day. I can't imagine drinking 20 gallons of water a day that Sarah mentioned in her video. Plus water for cooking and washing. A lot of times people ask, can I fill up my bathtub? Absolutely. You can use that water for cooking and for washing. You can also use your pool to flush your toilet if necessary. And of course, a manual can opener. Water should be stored in sanitized food-grade containers, so you don't use old milk cartons and figure that you'll just rinse and rinse and rinse. You won't rinse out the fat content. It will go rancid and you will gain a foodborne illness. But you do want to wash and rinse out any food-grade containers that don't contain milk. And you'll sanitize with the same solution that Sarah had mentioned, the 1 teaspoon non-scented per quart. Now that's to sanitize, that's not to purify our water. And rinse and clean thoroughly. Now what you can do, and we're going to talk more about this later, but you can take those old milk cartons, fill them with water, but label that they're not for drinking. And perhaps once you see that cone of opportunity, have a little bit at the air pocket at the top of the container, and place a container of water in your freezer every day, and you'll create big giant ice cubes to help keep your refrigerator and freezer cold. So how do you purify water? Well, if we have that boil event, then you'll need to boil for 3 to 4 minutes continuously, and a nice rolling boil. Aeration will improve a flat taste, so what we do recommend is just taking the water in 2 bowls back and forth 4 or 5 times. And to chlorinate, you would always want to use that unscented bleach and let it stand for 30 minutes. And again, there are the proportions for drinking water. So you've decided to go to a shelter. What do you take to the shelter? So you want to take everything. No, you want to take enough to be comfortable. A sleeping bag, a pillow. You're not going to be given cots. This isn't comfort living. You will be more comfortable staying in your home. The county really wants you to stay in your home. But if you don't feel that your home will be able to sustain a category 2 or category 3 or above, then you do need to go to a shelter. And you'll take with you a sleeping bag, the pillow, a blanket, an air mattress to sleep on, some towels and some personal hygiene items, but also extra clothing because you'll be there several days. Shoes, if you need hearing aids, extra batteries, your glasses, folding chairs and lawn chairs to sit upon, snacks and special dietary foods, quiet games, books, toys for children, and take with you those important documents. Please don't take with you any jewelry or expensive items like that. They're best in the safety deposit box. The food and nutrition services, the last 2 times that we opened our shelters for disasters, provided a meal per day for each site. It was 1 meal. So you need to be able to have enough food to sustain you for the rest of the day. I had something else I was going to add to that, and I'm having a senior moment and I'm forgetting, so I might remember later. I'll let you know. Without power, so as soon as we hear about the storm, our refrigerator should be set anywhere between 35 and 40 degrees. If you don't know, you can go out and buy one of those very small, inexpensive little thermometers. And I would put one in your refrigerator, one in your snack drawer if it's in a different compartment, and also one in your freezer. But turn your refrigerator down, get it nice and cold, take all of the items that can be frozen and place it into your freezer. So any meats that you can put in to your freezer, put it in your freezer. You can even freeze milk if you wanted to. If it's an unopened container, again, spill a little bit out before you put it in. But you want to try to get everything cold and frozen as best you can. So you've lost electricity. What are you going to do? First, you're going to use your perishable foods, foods from your refrigerator, and usually they're safe for about 4 hours, not beyond that. And if you have people who like to peek inside the refrigerator just because, every time you open that drawer, the drawer to the refrigerator, you lose heat, or excuse me, you lose coolness, and it will bring your safe time from 4 hours down to perhaps an hour or two. So eat those food items first. Second, use food from your freezer, and that should stay cold anywhere from 2 to 4 days if you keep your door closed. And you've also placed those ice containers inside your freezer. It will help you sustain till 4 days. If everything's melted, but you're still seeing ice crystals on your ground meat, that is still safe to eat. But if those ice crystals are gone, you have to let go of those food items. Nothing's more miserable than having a foodborne illness during a disaster, especially with no electricity and you're hot and miserable. And then you go to those non-perishable foods, foods like peanut butter and nuts and canned food items. And I will, at the end of the class tomorrow, I will send out an email with all kinds of tips of what you can make and what you can have in your pantry to sustain you. Without power, but you have a generator, make sure you use it with extreme caution. Only operate that generator outdoors. Generators can run from fairly reasonable to very expensive, depending upon the strength of it. You can have it run just your refrigerator, or perhaps your refrigerator and one of your air conditioning units, or just an air conditioning unit. Store gasoline in a well-marked non-glass container. Keep fire extinguishers near the generator, but if you are deciding to use gas or charcoal grills, they need to be operated outside of your home, not even in your garage with an open door. So post-natural disaster precautions. I know that, the first thing we like to do is what's happening outside. The storm has passed and we want to get out of our homes. We're tired of looking out the back to see what's happening, or the front windows. We want to see more than that, but you need to be patient. The county will go around and assess damage and let you know when it is safe and when it is safe to drive. Most of the deaths that occur happen after a storm, not during a storm, because people will get out their cars and start driving around and find themselves in conditions such as this, and next thing you know, they are a drowning victim. But also wading around in water. Remember, there's water snakes that are poisonous besides alligators. And there's also debris that could cause an injury to the bottom of your feet, and then you're in a whole different category of medical needs. So try to stay patient and wait for the alert of when you can leave your home. Another tip that somebody I found out quite by accident was that through the county, you can log in to some of the street lights as well as Siesta Key Beach. And you can see what's going on, like on Clark Road in Beneva. I know wherever there's a camera, those lovely cameras that catch us doing things we shouldn't be doing, and then we get our reward a few days later when we have to make our payments for our little trespasses. Those lights we can tune into, and you can get a great idea of debris or what's going on in that area. So waiting that extra day or so before you venture outside your home could actually save your life. So are you ready? Well, you just got informed with a lot of information. Are you ready to make a plan assemble your kit and update your kit and maintain it. And hopefully we'll never see conditions like what's in this photograph. But if we do, now we know at least how to stay safe. These are some great resources to use, and I will include these in the email that I will send out to you. And do I have any questions?
And I went ahead and put, thank you, Maria. I put your contact information in the chat window along with a link to your author blog profile.
Thank you. No questions?
Did you say you could log into, my husband wants to know, the street lights? You said something about logging in to look at Park Road. How do you do that?
You could go in. You can go in through the county website, and you'll find a link in there. It's kind of buried, but you can still find it. It's in there.
So Sarasota County, or what's the website again? Sorry.
The Sarasota County website, and it might be with emergency services. It might be with traffic and in that area.
Okay, okay. We'll look around and see if we can find it. Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you so much, Dr. Rometto and Agent Bostic. Thank you. We really appreciate your work and sharing this information with us. We are certainly here for if anyone has questions or you would like to chat further about anything that's been presented. You're also more than welcome to contact us through the contact information I shared in the chat. And then, like they said, they're gonna follow up with an email with some of the handouts and things to share.